Muhammad was also known as a man of integrity, and he attracted the attention of a wealthy older widow named Khadijah, who hired him to run her caravan operation. Soon after, she proposed marriage. According to the traditional Muslim biographies of Muhammad, he achieved financial success and built a happy marriage. However, he still struggled to find meaning in a world with so much poverty and injustice.
I think of the Prophet as being a religious seeker, somebody who was attuned to the notion of a God and of a developing spirituality really within his own life.
Muhammad found himself questioning the tribal religions that worshipped multiple gods.
He himself is believed by many to have been a member of a small group of peoples in Arabia who saw something wrong with the prevailing paganism, the rituals, the polytheism that was rampant in Arabia, and who would steal away from society from time to time in order to contemplate the realities of human existence.
It was during one of these retreats in a cave outside Mecca that Muhammad would have a vision that would change the course of history. In that cave, according to Muslim tradition, the Word of God would be revealed, setting off a chain of events that helped shape the world as we know it today. Five times a day, Muslims around the world turn in the direction of a beacon and pray. That beacon is the holy city of Mecca, located in what today is Saudi Arabia. But in the early 7th century AD, Mecca, Islam's most sacred site, was an Arab hub of pagan worship and a city rife with social injustice. That is, until the birth of one of the world's most sacred texts, the Quran. According to tradition, a 40-year-old trader named Muhammad ibn Abdullah would often withdraw alone to a cave outside Mecca to reflect on a world he saw as increasingly oppressive. It is believed that in the year 610, during one of his meditative retreats to the cave, Muhammad was abruptly gripped by an overwhelming presence.
Suddenly, he felt this intense pressure in his chest. He was surrounded by this darkness, and it felt as though he was being clasped by a giant hand and squeezed. He could barely breathe. And in his mind, he heard this voice, and the voice said, "Recite, recite."
He was shocked, stunned, probably wondering, did I really hear something? And then as he heard it again, he finally said, I don't have anything to recite. And eventually that voice, which tradition tells us was the angel Gabriel, revealed the first verse of the Quran.
Chapter 96, verse 1. Recite, in the name of your Lord who created humanity from a clot of blood. Recite, for your Lord is the most generous one, who has taught by the pen, taught humanity that which it did not know.
This is a very important moment because it's the moment in which Muhammad ceases to be just an ordinary Meccan businessman concerned with society's ill and suddenly becomes what in the biblical tradition is referred to as prophet. And like most prophets, he wants nothing to do with it.
Panicked and worried about his sanity, Muhammad sought out his wife Khadijah.
What he really wants to do is kill himself. But it is eventually Khadijah who saves him from this, and who explains to him that he has been called by God, that he has been given a task of prophecy, and that he really has no choice but to make this message known.
The revelation in the cave marked the beginning of 22 years in which it said Muhammad received the divine messages that would become the Quran. According to tradition, sometimes the words came ringing in his ear like a bell. At other points, they came in torturous fits that resembled epileptic seizures.
He would go into these convulsions, he would sweat, he would suddenly look off into the distance, he would be almost dead to the observer. And when he came out of these prophetic moments, he would suddenly spew out these revelations.
These revelations always seem to reflect the needs of the Arab people. The early verses were terse and simple. They were a challenge to the pagan practices of the Meccans and a summons to worship a single God. Chapter 73, verse 8. Remember the name of your Lord and devote yourself fully to him. He is the Lord of the East and the West. There is no God but he, so take him as your guardian. For the first few years of these revelations, Muhammad memorized the verses and only shared them with his wife and closest companions. But gradually he came to believe he'd been called to prophecy and that he had a duty to pass on to others the holy words collecting in his head. Finally, in the year 612, the reluctant prophet went into central Mecca and began to preach.
It was a wake-up call to those citizens of Mecca who, in the eyes of the prophet, had lost an awareness, if they ever had it, of a supreme God, of the one God who created all and who guides all.
But while the God of which Muhammad spoke was glorious and merciful, he was also wrathful. The prophet told the Meccans that a day of judgment would come when there would be consequences for their actions on earth.
Here is this man, and it's known that he's been carrying on these vigils, and he comes into the marketplace, say, and he says, the world will end. The God who created the world will bring it to an end, and you are part of that. Now that is a powerful, powerful message.
A powerful message, but not a new one. Muhammad made it clear that the Quran was the very same revelation that had been sent down to the Jews and Christians centuries earlier, a message about God's guidance for humankind. But now the revelation was coming to the Arab people for the first time and in their own language.
The Prophet never said that I brought a new religion for you. The Prophet simply said, I am a messenger bringing the same message which has been brought to you by dozens and dozens of these extraordinary figures in our mutual history.
Over and over again, the Quran says, do not forget what happened to Abraham when, and then it'll tell a story about Abraham. Do not forget what happened to Joseph, and then it will tell a story of Joseph. And the interesting thing about it is that these stories are presented in sort of a Reader's Digest version. They're sort of summaries of these great stories. The audience that the Quran was revealed to was already familiar with these stories because they were living in a city that was steeped in these traditions.
According to Muslims, one of the most remarkable aspects of the Quran is that Muhammad memorized the revelations as they came to him and then recited them verbatim to his followers. While there was a form of written Arabic at the time, few knew how to read or write it. Muhammad was no exception.
The belief within Islam is that Muhammad was illiterate. What that underscores then, of course, is on the one hand, the fact that he wouldn't have written these revelations himself. On the other hand, the question is, well, how were they preserved?
Muhammad's small band of followers would promptly commit to memory each new revelation they heard, adding verse after verse to a mental collection of the already existing Quran. Given the culture that they were living in, such feats of memory are not surprising.
The societies that we are talking about are oral cultures. So in a sense, the oral culture in which Muhammad lived allowed people to listen in something for one time or even two times and have the ability to memorize that and be able to recite it verbatim.
As his catalog of revelations grew, Muhammad continued to preach on the streets of Mecca, gaining a small group of converts. His followers came to be known as Muslims, which means those who submit to God. Muhammad's message appealed especially to the city's poor and underprivileged, who heard their own lives echoed in the verse's pleas for social justice, that slaves should be freed, and that the rich and powerful should give charity to the needy. Some converts to the Quran's message were seduced by the beauty of the language itself, which they saw as so perfect, it must be evidence of God's existence.
When Muslims are asked, well, all right, what proof have you got that this is a divine revelation?